The parts inside your car were rigged: the airbag, the seatbelt, the wire harness, the steering wheel, every single one. Not by accident, not by one company, by a cartel. A cartel so large, the Department of Justice called it the biggest criminal investigation in its history. Over 100 companies, 29 executives sentenced, $2.9 billion in criminal fines, and the parts that were rigged, they were installed in 25 million cars. Cars that are probably still on the road. Cars that people are still paying off. They knew what was in your car before you did, and they priced it accordingly. But the question this investigation forces you to ask, the one that gets uncomfortable once you sit with it, is not how much they took. It is, how did over 100 companies coordinate across dozens of product categories, across multiple continents, for more than a decade, and nobody noticed? To understand what happened, you need to understand how a car is actually assembled. Automakers, Ford, GM, Toyota, Honda, Volkswagen, do not manufacture most of what goes into their vehicles. They design them, they assemble them. But the components, the electrical systems, the safety restraints, the sensors, the thermal management, the braking hardware, those are built by a global network of suppliers. Those suppliers compete for contracts. In theory, in practice, for at least a decade, from the late 1990s through 2010, the largest automotive parts suppliers in the world were not competing. They were coordinating. The cartel operated across multiple continents, across dozens of product categories, across hundreds of individual contracts. It was not one conspiracy. It was dozens of overlapping conspiracies, each covering a different component, each run by a different subset of companies, all operating simultaneously. Wire harnesses, airbags, seatbelts, bearings, instrument panels, heater controls, steering wheels, starters, windshield wipers, anti-vibration rubber, fuel senders. Every time an automaker put a contract out for bid, the suppliers already knew who was going to win, and they already knew what price would be submitted. The word for this is bid rigging, and for over a decade, it was standard practice. Here is how it worked. When an automaker issued a request for quotation, a formal invitation to bid on a parts contract, the suppliers would meet, sometimes in person, sometimes by phone, sometimes using code names and encrypted communications. They would decide in advance who would win the contract. The designated winner would submit a competitive price. The other participants would submit deliberately inflated bids, high enough to lose, structured to look legitimate. The automaker believed they were receiving competitive quotes. They were receiving a performance. The coordinated price was always higher than genuine competition would have produced. The difference, the margin between the rigged price and what the market would have set, was extracted from every automaker on every contract for over a decade. The primary companies involved read like a roster of the global automotive supply chain. Yazaki Corporation, the world's second-largest automotive wire harness manufacturer, pleaded guilty. $200 million in fines. Executives sentenced to U.S. federal prison. Furukawa Electric, another major wire harness supplier, pleaded guilty. $200 million. 3 executives imprisoned. Denso Corporation, one of the world's largest auto parts manufacturers, a Toyota Group company, pleaded guilty. $78 million. Autoliv, the world's largest automotive safety system supplier, pleaded guilty to fixing prices on seatbelts, airbags, and steering wheels. The cartel did not cover one product. It covered everything. The investigation began the way most major cartel cases begin, with a cooperator. In 2010, the Department of Justice Antitrust Division received information from a company willing to cooperate in exchange for leniency. The initial tip covered wire harness products. Investigators obtained search warrants. They raided offices in the United States, Japan, and Europe simultaneously. What they found was not one conspiracy. It was a network. Each product category had its own coordination structure. Each had its own meeting schedule, its own communication protocols, its own price-fixing agreements. The companies involved had developed systems sophisticated enough to avoid leaving obvious paper trails, but not sophisticated enough to withstand a coordinated international investigation. As each company was confronted with evidence, they cooperated. And as each cooperated, they provided evidence against the next. The DOJ described it as Cascading Cooperators. a chain reaction where each guilty plea unlocked the next investigation. By the time the major prosecutions concluded, the investigation had expanded from wire harnesses to more than 20 separate product categories. It had reached companies in Japan, Germany, South Korea, and the United States. It had resulted in charges against more than 100 companies and executives across multiple DOJ offices simultaneously. The Department of Justice called it, in their own words, the largest criminal antitrust investigation in the history of the division. Not the largest automotive investigation, the largest of any kind, ever. 25 million cars. That is the number of vehicles the Department of Justice confirmed contained parts that were subject to price-fixing conspiracies. Every airbag that fired, every seatbelt that held, every wire harness that carried the signal from your ignition to your engine. Rigged. Here is where the money went. The inflated parts prices were paid by the automakers, and automakers passed those costs to consumers, built into the sticker price of every vehicle, invisible, indistinguishable from legitimate manufacturing costs. Automotive consulting analyses presented in court proceedings estimated that supplier cartels added thousands of dollars to the average vehicle cost over the period the conspiracies operated. You didn't pay for a rigged part, you paid for a car. But inside that car, in the airbag, in the seatbelt, in the electrical system, was a component whose price had been decided in a secret meeting before anyone ever quoted it to the manufacturer. The executives who ran those meetings collected bonuses based on the margins those prices produced. 32 of them were sentenced, prison terms ranging from 1 year to 18 months. The companies paid fines. The fines were large, and for most of them, they were also less than the profits the conspiracies generated. The math worked out, even accounting for prosecution. Most of the companies in this cartel fixed prices. They colluded on bids. They extracted margin from contracts that should have been competitive. What they did was criminal. People went to prison for it. But one company in this network didn't just rig the price. One company rigged the product. Their airbags didn't just cost more than they should have. Their airbags exploded. That investigation, the one that starts where this one ends, is coming to this channel. When it does, remember this video. Because the company that built those airbags was operating inside the same network, the same meetings, the same industry. The cartel that inflated your parts bill is the same world that produced the airbag that was supposed to save your life. The auto parts cartel raises a question that goes beyond the individual companies. How does a conspiracy this large, covering this many products, this many companies, this many countries, operate for over a decade without detection? The answer is structural. Automakers outsource component manufacturing specifically to achieve cost efficiency through competition. But they are not equipped to detect collusion among their own suppliers. They receive bids. They compare prices. If all the prices are rigged, the comparison tells them nothing. Regulators face the same problem. Price fixing among suppliers is invisible from the outside. It only becomes visible when someone inside decides to cooperate. The cartel operated for as long as it did not because the companies were sophisticated. It operated because the structure of the industry created a space where coordination was easy, detection was difficult, and the financial incentives to participate were enormous. That structure has not fundamentally changed. The same outsourcing model, the same competitive bidding process, the same information gaps between what suppliers know and what automakers can verify. The cartel ended because of a cooperator, not because the system detected it. 100 companies, 29 executives sentenced to prison, $2.9 billion in fines, 25 million vehicles, and the parts are still in the cars, and the cars are still on the road, and the executives who weren't prosecuted, the ones whose coordination was documented but whose companies cooperated early enough to limit individual liability, they're still in the industry. Here is what I keep coming back to in 2026. The investigation that uncovered this started with one cooperator, one company that decided the risk of prosecution outweighed the benefit of continuing. Before that cooperator, nothing. What is still running right now, that no one has decided to report yet. This channel exists because these stories don't end when the headlines do. The auto parts cartel was prosecuted, the fines were paid, the industry moved on, and one of the companies in that network was still building a product that would eventually be linked to over 24 confirmed fatalities worldwide. That story is coming to this channel. If this investigation made you angry, Good. It should. Subscribe to Auto Underworld. Every week, we go after the stories the industry doesn't want told. The next one is already in production. You don't want to miss it.